My wife went to a couple's party with a strange man, so I followed her. I stood across the street for a few seconds, watching them walk in together as if they were a real couple, smiling, as if nothing was out of place. The dress she wore that night was the same one she'd chosen with me one Saturday afternoon at the mall, when she still claimed I was the love of her life. Her hand gripped his arm with the same gentleness she used to calm me when something was bothering me. In that instant, I realized the touch was no longer just mine. When I walked into the party and appeared beside her, I noticed her smile shatter in an instant, her eyes lost their sparkle, and her face went pale. She froze. There was no escape. She was there, before me, with another man, in front of everyone, as if I no longer existed. I simply looked into her eyes and, with a calm I didn't even know I was capable of, said, "You didn't need this. You just had to tell me you weren't happy with me anymore." And I walked away. I'd never felt anything so devastating. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hate. It was a kind of pain that gnaws at you from within, silent but irreversible. I returned home in silence. The rooms were intact, but the air carried a scent of ending. The scent of her perfume still lingered in the hallways, and every detail of the house reminded me how naive I'd been to think love was enough. I wrote a short letter on the divorce papers. "I hope this new person does more for you than I did." I folded the paper and left it on the table. I didn't cry that night. Or the next day. But every night that followed was filled with silence and unrelenting questions. What was missing? What had I failed to do? Had she ever tried to warn me? Or had he already decided long before he walked through that door with another man? The days passed like a silent storm. Life reshaped itself. I cared for my children with the same love as always. They became my strength, my refuge. They didn't know exactly what had happened, but they knew something had changed forever. Little by little, I regained control of my routine. I reconnected with my passions, found new directions. And, without forcing anything, I met another woman. It wasn't a reunion with love. It was an encounter with peace. She arrived unhurriedly, without promising anything, she simply stayed. She listened to me like no one else. She respected me in every silence. She welcomed me when I was still learning to deal with the shadows left by a love that turned its back on me. She, on the other hand, didn't know I'd moved on. She believed I still ached for her, that I'd be there waiting at any moment, ready to welcome her back if she ever decided to return. But life isn't just about longing. It's about choices. And she chose. She chose the false glow of a fleeting romance, the charm of a novelty that grew old too quickly. The new man beside her didn't treat her the way I did. He didn't care about the details, he didn't take care of the little things. He didn't see in her the woman I once saw. And it was then that she realized something that came like a punch in the gut: no man would love her the way I loved her. None. I knew this months later, when she appeared at my door. Her expression was haggard, her eyes heavy with regrets that could no longer be undone. She said she needed to talk to me, that she had understood everything, that only now did she realize how much she had destroyed something that might never be rebuilt. I let her in. Not because I still felt anything. But because my peace was so great that I could listen without anger. She looked around the room, saw the photos of my children smiling beside the new woman who was now part of my life. She sat on the sofa where we had so often lain together on quiet Sundays. And she cried. She said she'd found a box of old letters, written by me, in a drawer she hadn't opened in years. She said she spent hours reading every word, feeling every emotion as if she were living it all over again. She said those letters were more than words, they were proof. Proof of true love. A love she'd spurned, a love she'd traded for empty promises and brief nights. And then, for the first time since everything happened, she said it outright: "I regretted it. I regretted it the minute I saw you weren't coming back. That you weren't mine anymore." But time, that implacable judge, had already decided. The love that existed between us was buried not for lack of feeling, but for excessive selfishness. And no amount of regret can bring back what was destroyed by choice. She looked at me, waiting for a reaction, perhaps a spark of hope, something that might indicate there was still a chance. But my heart was already elsewhere. It already belonged to another woman. A woman who didn't need to lose me to value me. And it was in that moment that she understood the depth of what she had done. She had exchanged the essential for the ephemeral. She had lost the love of her life for something that had not even stood the test of time. But there was one last thing. A secret she carried and only revealed when she had nothing left to lose. A silent confession that changed everything once again. Something hidden not in the acts of betrayal, but in the reasons behind them. A closely guarded detail, that would put the whole story in a new light. But, what was this secret that she confessed, when there was nothing left to save? Welcome to the channel. Here, we've made it clear from the start, we do not support any kind of betrayal. The stories told are fictional, but based on situations real and possible, and serve to show how much betrayal destroys homes, feelings and lives. Get ready to dive into an intense narrative, full of emotion, regret and irreversible choices. Settle in. Take a deep breath. Because now, you're going to hear a shocking story. His name was Daniel. He was 38 years old, and he carried in his eyes a calmness that couldn't be learned in books, but only developed through life. He was the kind of man who spoke little but spoke volumes with his gestures. He worked as a logistics manager at a medium-sized company and lived a simple life, but with a sense of responsibility that made him seem larger than he actually was. He never flaunted anything, except perhaps the pride he felt in the family he'd built. For him, love was a well-executed routine, making coffee before she woke up, leaving notes on the fridge with silly, loving phrases, picking up the kids from school even after an exhausting day. His love wasn't loud, but it was present in everything. Amanda was his wife. 35 years old, a literature teacher at the neighborhood school, a woman with an expressive gaze and a soft, yet intense, speech. She was known among colleagues and students for her sensitivity, for the way she was moved by the classics and how she transformed each class into a dive into the world of feelings. Her heart was full, but she always yearned for more. She thirsted for depth, for experiences that made her feel alive beyond the routine. When she met Daniel, still in college, what enchanted her most was precisely his calmness. The way he looked at her, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world to listen to what she had to say. They married 3 years later, in a small but meaningful ceremony, and they were never the kind of couple who needed to prove their love to others. They were self-sufficient. The house they lived in had a soul of its own. It was a 2-story house with neutral-toned walls, books scattered throughout the rooms, their children's toys discarded in the corner of the living room, and a constant aroma of fresh coffee mixed with lavender essence. The couple's bedroom was decorated with old photos, the kind printed, in wooden frames they painted themselves on a rainy Sunday. Their children, 8-year-old Lucas and 5-year-old Isabella, gave the house an energy beyond words. Every corner held a memory, a laugh, a shared weariness, a renewed hope. Daniel was the kind of father who slept on his children's bedroom floor when they had nightmares. Amanda was the mother who taught them poetry before bed. They were a cohesive team. They had their disagreements, of course, like any couple married for almost a decade, but they knew how to listen to each other, even when it was difficult. He, with his almost unshakable serenity. She, with her intensity that bordered on the dramatic. And perhaps it was this unlikely balance that held them together. In their neighborhood, they were viewed with admiration. Not for anything extraordinary, but for what seems to be lost these days, genuine companionship. Neighbors always commented on how thoughtful Daniel was and how generous Amanda was. The children's birthday parties were always held in the garage, with a cake she baked and handmade decorations he helped hang. No luxury. Just authenticity. Mornings began early. Amanda would wake before sunrise, pack the kids' lunches, organize their school supplies, and leave for work with her hair tied up messily and a coffee to go. Daniel would wake soon after, get the kids ready, put Lucas's uniform on, and tie Isabella's sneakers with the patience of a monk. It was in the rush of the mornings that the two would meet at the kitchen door for a quick kiss, often with hurried words, but always accompanied by a lingering look. A look that said more than gestures could allow. The nights were quieter. After putting their children to bed, they sat together on the porch, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking about life, the day, small victories or frustrations. Amanda with a glass of wine, Daniel with a cup of tea. Sometimes she recited passages from books, and he, even without understanding much, listened with admiration. Sometimes he talked about challenges at work, and she listened as if it were the most important thing in the world. It was in this shared time, away from the eyes of the world, that their love was nurtured. But like everything alive, love also requires movement. Amanda, with her restless soul, began to feel something inside her struggling. It wasn't a lack of love for Daniel, nor for her children. It was something deeper, more silent, that she herself couldn't yet name. She looked back at her life and, although she saw beauty in everything, a restlessness gnawed at her on the longest nights. Perhaps it was the weight of the years. Perhaps it was the desire to rediscover something within herself that she had forgotten. Daniel could tell, even if she didn't say so. He felt it in the long pauses between conversations. In the lost gaze when she thought he wasn't looking. In the absence of the laughter that had come so easily before. He tried to fill the gaps, to be even more present, more attentive, but he also knew there were feelings that couldn't be fixed with good intentions. Still, he didn't question it. He trusted her, their story, the love they'd built with so much effort. It was a strange, unusually quiet time. Amanda started arriving late, claiming to have pedagogical meetings, new projects at school. Daniel didn't suspect anything. He knew her dedication, knew how she gave herself to her students, to her causes. But something in her eyes had changed. There was fatigue, but also guilt. And Daniel felt it, even if he couldn't explain it. Even so, the routine continued. The chores, the family lunches on weekends, the loving notes in the children's lunchboxes, the birthdays celebrated with simplicity. And through it all, the silent effort of a man who did everything he could to keep alive a love that was beginning, unbeknownst to him, to slip through his fingers. Amanda, for her part, was torn between longing for what she was and the confusion of what she felt. She still looked at Daniel fondly, but something inside her was lost in the shadows of a search she couldn't even define. Every night she lay beside him, she felt a mixture of gratitude and discomfort. She wanted to be there, but she also wanted to be somewhere else, experiencing something else, perhaps feeling like a different person. But there were never shouts, there were never fights. Only silences. Silences so thick they screamed. Silences that spoke volumes. And it was in these silences that history began to change. No scandals, no fuss. Just time, relentless, moving the pieces. The children continued to grow, oblivious to the complexities unfolding around them. The neighbors continued to smile, admiring this exemplary couple. And Daniel, still believing that true love endures all, held tightly to the reins of a home that was beginning to falter, even without realizing it. Until one day, Amanda encountered something she hadn't expected. A feeling that rekindled what had been extinguished. An impulse that, for a moment, seemed to bring back what she'd been searching for so long. And it was from that moment, a brief but definitive moment, that everything began to change. But at that moment, everything still seemed in order. The home was standing. The laughter still echoed, albeit softer. The hug still happened, albeit shorter. The dreams, though dusty, still existed. And it was precisely this apparent normality that made everything more fragile. Because, behind it, lurked a storm about to erupt. And no one, not even Amanda, could have foreseen the consequences of what would come next. In recent months, Amanda had been living with a growing unease without apparent explanation. It began subtly, like an absence she couldn't name, a slight discomfort in the small things of everyday life. It was as if she were watching her own life from the outside, observing herself in automatic gestures, like someone reading a book for the second time, already knowing the ending. The home she built with Daniel remained intact on the outside, but inside, something wavered. Silently, she began to lose herself in long thoughts during classes, on the way home, on the nights her husband fell asleep before her. Daniel was still present, loving, constant, but that constancy, which had once given her security, now made her feel trapped in a bubble. She didn't want to leave, but she also didn't know how to stay. The desire for something that would break with predictability intensified one afternoon when Amanda was invited by a coworker to a couples event hosted by a group of teachers and close friends. The proposal was simple, a private, elegant, informal dinner dance, reserved for adults only. It would be a light evening with live music, wine, conversation, and reconnecting. She mentioned the invitation to Daniel, who politely declined, citing fatigue after a demanding week at work. He told her she should go and have fun, that it was important to her, and that he would stay home with the children. Amanda hesitated. She didn't like going to this kind of event alone. But something inside her urged her to accept. She needed a breath of fresh air, a space where she wasn't just a mother, a wife, and a teacher. She needed, even if she didn't know it clearly, to feel like a woman again. On the day of the event, she took her time getting ready. She chose a dress she hadn't worn in a long time, brushed her hair more carefully than usual, and put on a bolder lipstick. As she looked in the mirror, she had a strange feeling she was about to cross an invisible line. But she didn't back down. She grabbed her bag and left, ready with an excuse in case Daniel asked anything more than necessary. He didn't. She smiled, said goodnight, and went back to playing with Isabella on the living room rug. Upon arriving at the party venue, Amanda was greeted enthusiastically by her classmates, but it was a face among the guests that unnerved her. It was a man she had met months earlier, the father of a student from another school, with whom she had exchanged a few words during an interinstitutional pedagogical meeting. The reunion was casual, but his gaze was incisive. Unlike Daniel, he spoke intensely, with hunger, with explicit desire hidden between the lines. Throughout the evening, they talked more than was prudent. They laughed about trivial matters, shared inconsequential stories, but the subtext was charged. When they danced together, the contact of their bodies was enough for Amanda to know something was about to be sealed. And even though she could have stopped, she didn't want to. That night didn't end in the ballroom. They left together, without planning, as if simply obeying an inevitable force. The hotel was nearby. The moral justifications Amanda had always valued dissipated in the face of the urgency of the moment. The next morning, she woke up next to him with an emotional hangover. She avoided eye contact, dressed quickly, and left without saying much. On the way home, the silence in the car suffocated her. Daniel welcomed her naturally, as if he hadn't even considered that something so profound could have been torn apart in a single night. But nothing would ever be the same again. Amanda tried to return to her routine, pretending nothing had happened. She hugged her children tighter, looked at Daniel with a melancholy tenderness. He, for his part, didn't notice the change right away, but gradually began to feel a distance he couldn't explain. She was quieter, more distracted, more absent even when present. She spent more time on her phone, justifying delays with poorly thought-out excuses. Daniel tried to understand, giving her space, thinking perhaps she was going through a difficult time at work, some stress she wasn't yet ready to share. He didn't insist. He was never one to pressure. He believed that true love respects the other's time. Amanda, however, continued to see him on discrete dates. They began meeting at off-peak times, in neutral places, always with the feeling they were about to be discovered. Over time, their involvement ceased to be merely physical. He said what Amanda wanted to hear, telling her she was special, that she deserved more, that she was underestimated, overlooked in her own marriage. Words like these, spoken vehemently, began to taint her perception. She began to look at Daniel with a certain pity. She thought he was too good, but perhaps good in a dull way. She questioned whether he truly saw her as a woman or just as his usual reliable companion. And this doubt became poison. A slow, silent poison that corroded everything they had built. Daniel, on the other hand, began sleeping poorly. He felt something was breaking, but he couldn't pinpoint what it was. Sometimes he would get up in the middle of the night, walk around the house, look at the scattered toys, the pictures hanging on the walls, trying to understand what was wrong. Amanda no longer sought him out like she used to. I didn't touch him like I used to. I didn't look at him with the same intensity. Still, he resisted the idea of distrust. He always trusted her. He always believed that the love that united them was greater than any crisis. One Friday afternoon, while picking up Isabella from school, one of the mothers casually mentioned a dinner for two she'd witnessed the night before at a downtown restaurant. She mentioned seeing Amanda with a man she didn't know. She said it with a smile, without malice, believing it to be an innocent dinner, perhaps a work dinner. Daniel smiled back, but inside something snapped. He returned home in silence, but unease set in. For the first time, he allowed himself to be suspicious. And with that permission, his inner world began to crumble. That night, Daniel watched her. Her gestures were different. Her gaze avoided his. The goodnight kiss was cold. When she fell asleep, he left the room, went to the office, opened her laptop, and, with a mixture of hesitation and guilt, accessed her emails. And there they were. Messages exchanged, some shallow, some explicit. Evidence. Lines and lines of words that confirmed what his heart already knew but his mind refused to accept. The betrayal was real. It wasn't a daydream, it wasn't an exaggeration. It was fact. Daniel closed the computer, leaned against the wall, and stayed there for long minutes, trying to reorganize his mind. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just felt. He felt the ground give way, felt the weight of broken trust, of history being rewritten behind his back. He felt the kind of pain that makes no noise, but tears from within. When he returned to the room, Amanda was sleeping peacefully. Her body breathed peacefully, and that peace was the cruelest part. Because her tranquility contrasted with the chaos that had just settled inside him. The next day, Daniel said nothing. He took the children to the park, made lunch, washed the dishes. Every gesture was an attempt to maintain normalcy. Not for her. But for the children. And, deep down, for himself too. He wanted time. Time to decide how to react, how to move on, how to transform that pain into some form of dignity. On Monday, he called a lawyer. He asked for guidance on the legal steps to initiate separation proceedings. He didn't mention the reason. He simply said he needed to resolve something calmly. When he returned home, he found Amanda getting ready to go out. She was in a hurry, saying she was going to a meeting with colleagues to discuss a new project. Daniel simply nodded. The pain was still raw, but he was beginning to control it. He was beginning to realize that what had been destroyed would never be rebuilt in the same way. But he needed to see it with his own eyes. He needed to witness it to fully accept it. On Thursday night, he followed Amanda in silence, the car turned off at a distance. He saw her park. He saw her get out, smiling. He saw her greet him. He saw the touch, the kiss. He saw everything. And even though he already knew, feeling it was different. It was definitive. He entered the party as if crossing a minefield. Her eyes met his, and her smile faded. Paleness replaced color. That was the moment when everything would be revealed. And with a piercing serenity, he approached and said what he had been holding back since the moment he knew. And it was there, in that moment frozen in time, that Amanda realized that everything she thought she controlled had already slipped through her fingers. What she didn't know, however, was that there was still one last hidden thread, a secret she never imagined could be revealed, and that thread would be the final line between regret and ruin. Amanda hadn't been able to breathe properly for days since the moment Daniel showed up at that party. The image of him standing at the entrance, firm, calm, his eyes fixed on her as if he didn't need to say anything to say everything, still haunted her. The silence he brought with him was more violent than any scream. She felt her blood run cold, her breath catch, as if the whole world had stopped to watch the collapse of what had once been a home. Since then, he hadn't sought her out. He hadn't asked, he hadn't accused, he hadn't confronted her. He simply disappeared. He withdrew from the narrative like someone forcibly ripped away, but still chose to leave with dignity. And that broke her more than any explosive reaction. She expected despair, anger, humiliation. What she received was silence and a goodbye written in words so gentle they hurt like blades. "I hope this new person does more for you than I did." That phrase reverberated within her like an endless echo. She tried to move forward with her new relationship, but everything felt false now. The conversations sounded empty, the touches mechanical, the promises tired. She began to realize that the man she'd risked everything for wasn't who she thought he was. His actions revealed a subtle selfishness, a lack of care that contrasted painfully with the vivid memory of the man she'd left behind. Over time, the mask slipped completely. He began to treat her like just another person, with impatience, with disdain. Amanda tried to maintain some dignity, but the pain of regret began to sink deeper into her. And it was on a gray afternoon, alone in her room, that she decided to reorganize a forgotten drawer in her closet. Among old papers and unimportant documents, she found a wooden box. Opening it, she found dozens of letters written by Daniel during the early years of their marriage. Letters with firm handwriting and sweet words, filled with sincere promises, memories of simple and true moments, declarations of a love that now seemed unattainable. She read each one with a broken heart, immersed in tears, feeling his absence like a muffled scream in her chest. It was as if the past had returned to show her, with brutal clarity, what she had lost. And it was in that moment, between one letter and the next, that she understood, she had not only betrayed Daniel. She had betrayed herself, the future they had shared, the love that existed, the home that was now empty. Seized by an impulse, she decided to look for him. She wanted to apologize, explain, perhaps rebuild any remaining bridges. When she arrived at the house where she had once lived, she saw that everything was different. New flowers in the garden, toys arranged differently, and in the living room, through the window, a female figure with the children. His stomach lurched. He rang the doorbell with trembling hands, his heart pounding. It was he who answered. He was more serene than she had imagined. His gaze no longer held pain, but a kind of peace she had never known. He wasn't surprised, simply stared at her for several long seconds before asking what she wanted. Amanda asked to come in. "You said you needed to talk." Daniel hesitated, but let her in. They walked through the hallway that had once witnessed so much laughter and now seemed strange, foreign. They sat across from each other. She began to speak, as if trying to stitch together the torn pieces of a story that no longer exists. She said she had lost herself, that she had made a mistake, that she missed him in everything. She thought she needed something new, but now she understood the value of what she had abandoned. Daniel listened silently, without interrupting, his gaze fixed but not cold. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then he said, his voice low but firm, that it had taken him time to understand, but that now he knew there was no longer room within him for what had once been theirs. He said he was with someone else, that his children adored her, that he felt at peace, and that he didn't want to start over something that had been destroyed by her choice. Amanda lowered her eyes, feeling the tears well up, trying to contain the despair that was building. But then, as if needing to free herself of one last burden, she let go. She said there was something he needed to know. A detail she'd kept hidden out of fear, shame, and unsure how to deal with it. That it would change everything. And when Daniel asked what it was, she took a deep breath, choked back her tears, and told him. She'd found his letters again. The old ones. And as she reread each word, she felt they were still alive. That even after everything, the love he felt for her was greater than she herself understood. And it was there, among those pages yellowed with time, that she realized what she'd destroyed. But that wasn't all. She said she'd found something else inside the box. A sealed envelope, one she'd never opened. It was a letter he'd written in the days leading up to the birth of Lucas, her eldest son. In it, Daniel said that, if something happened to him, he wanted Amanda to know how much she was the love of his life, that she had made him a better man, and that he hoped that, even as time passed, she would always know how much she was loved. Amanda, upon reading it, fell to the living room floor, bursting into tears. And in that moment, something else pierced her. Something Daniel never imagined. She confessed that, after Isabella's birth, when she felt confused, overwhelmed, and alone, even surrounded by love, she had considered leaving. But she didn't. Because she found another letter, written by him after a trivial argument, in which he said he would never give up on her, even when she didn't have the strength to carry on. These letters, these silent proofs of true love, were the anchors that kept her there the longest. But the moment she put them away and forgot them, she also forgot the value of what she had. Daniel listened in silence, but his face was serious, as if he were unintentionally reliving old memories. And then he asked, his voice dry, "Why are you telling me this now?" Amanda replied through sobs that she wanted him to know that, even though he'd moved on, she finally understood. She understood it wasn't a lack of love. It was a lack of self. That the problem was never him. And that now, too late, she saw that no one would love her the way he had. Daniel stood. He walked slowly to the window. He took a deep breath. He said it hurt to hear that. Because he'd fought so hard to keep her there, even on the days when she was gone. That everything she discovered now, he'd tried to reveal for years. That he didn't write letters to impress, but because he needed her to know, in words, the depth of his feelings. And that, unfortunately, some feelings die quietly. That forgiveness might exist. But that love, the love that lived on in letters and gestures, had been buried with dignity. Amanda simply nodded, crying softly, her heart in pieces. And when she got up to leave, leaving behind not just a house but the only true story she'd ever had, she turned to him and, before walking through the door, asked if he still kept the letters. Daniel didn't answer. But his look was enough. She knew he did. She knew he kept every word, not for her, but for the man he was. And that was the difference. He moved on without erasing the past. She, on the other hand, erased the present, trying to escape it. And it was there, in that half-open door, that the final chapter of their story closed. But fate, ever silent, still had one last twist in store, and it was closer than either of them could have imagined. Daniel closed the door slowly, unhurriedly, as if knowing this gesture was more symbolic than functional. The silence of the house seemed to amplify the sound of the doorknob turning, as if time itself were observing that farewell without an audience. Amanda was gone, and with her she carried everything that cannot be rebuilt, the guilt of what she lost, the knowledge of what she destroyed, and the certainty that she would never be loved in the same way again. Daniel walked to the kitchen and stood there, staring out the window. The new woman in his life, Lara, was in the backyard playing with the children. Her laughter filled the air, bringing a lightness that contrasted sharply with the heaviness of the previous moment. And for the first time since the beginning of it all, Daniel felt immense gratitude for not having let himself be dragged down by grief. Because now he saw clearly that his future was not only at peace, he was whole. The reunion with Amanda had brought him more than a reopened scar. It brought clarity. It brought closure. He finally understood that he no longer needed to carry that story as a burden or an open wound. She was now just part of his story. A closed chapter. But even with all of this resolved within him, there was something still unsaid, something Amanda hadn't been able to fully express during that visit. And Daniel, who always knew how to read silences, sensed it. There was something more. Something she hadn't had the courage to reveal. And that unsettled him. Not because he wanted to rekindle or relive anything, but because he couldn't stand gaps. He wanted to understand completely. He wanted closure once and for all. 2 days later, after leaving work, Daniel decided to stop by the school where Amanda taught. He didn't announce his arrival. He waited outside, leaning against a tree, watching the students slowly leave. When she appeared, their eyes met, and he simply nodded. She approached hesitantly. She was surprised, but not scared. Just vulnerable. Daniel was direct. He said he sensed there was more to it than what she'd said. Amanda was silent for a few seconds, biting her lip, looking around as if searching for an escape, but finally, she relented. She said she couldn't bear this alone again. They walked to a small cafe nearby. They sat at a table in the back, away from prying eyes. She stirred her cup, her eyes fixed on the bottom of the coffee, as if that was the courage she needed. And then she began. She said that the man she'd gotten involved with, the one she'd destroyed everything for, hadn't just been an emotional escape. There was more. She'd met this man months before the first betrayal. It was during an educational lecture in another state. At the time, she already felt lost, overwhelmed, emotionally isolated, but hadn't spoken to anyone. This man approached her with a speech of admiration, respect, and sensitivity. He promised to listen, promised something new, promised intensity. But, unlike Daniel's expectations, Amanda didn't fall for it immediately. She resisted. 4 weeks. 4 months. But little by little, he manipulated the narrative until Amanda began to believe she was a victim of a limited life, that she deserved more, that she had been deprived of herself for too long. He planted such a subtle idea that she didn't even notice when she began to change her attitudes, her clothes, her schedule, her priorities. And worst of all, she began to hide these changes from herself, justifying them as liberation, as rediscovery. Daniel listened to her without interrupting. His expression was firm, but there was no longer any pain. Only genuine interest in understanding everything. Amanda took a deep breath and then let out what was left. She said that before everything happened, even before the first physical betrayal, there was a decisive moment. She received a proposal from that man. A concrete proposal. He wanted her to leave everything behind, husband, children, city, routine. He said she deserved to start from scratch with someone who truly understood her. Amanda, in an unthinking act, began to consider it. She even looked at properties, looked at jobs in another city. She even researched schools for the children. But as she began to put together her plan, she saw, with frightening clarity, that she didn't want that. That she couldn't imagine herself away from Daniel. That she never really wanted to leave. She just wanted to be heard. She just wanted someone to look at her with desire and curiosity again. And when she realized this, she tried to back away. She tried to cut off the relationship. But the man didn't take it well. He began to pressure her. To threaten her. She said she would tell Daniel everything. That she would end her life. That she would show him who she really was. Amanda panicked. She began to live under emotional blackmail, trapped between guilt and fear. And that was why, she said, she continued the relationship even after realizing she'd made the worst choice of her life. Because she felt trapped. Because she was afraid of losing her children, her reputation, herself. And that, ironically enough, Daniel's appearance at that party was her liberation. Because his finding out everything was, paradoxically, what saved her. It was when everything came to light that the man lost his power. Amanda broke up with him that same week. He tried to insist, but she was determined. Not out of self-love, she was trying to rebuild that, but out of love for her children, for the memory of who she once was, for respect for the man she betrayed, but who was still, for her, the greatest love of her life. Daniel was silent for a long time after she finished. The coffee grew cold. The words ceased. Until he said, his voice firm but gentle, that he understood. That he didn't justify it, but he understood. That this secret, however painful, brought a necessary end. That now he could move on with true peace. And that she, if she had the courage to make peace with herself, could too. Amanda smiled through her tears. Not a smile of joy, but of relief. Of someone who knew she had told everything, leaving nothing hidden. As they left, Daniel offered her a hug. It was brief, respectful. A silent goodbye. As they walked away, she stood there watching him walk away. She knew this was their last real contact. That the chapter had ended with dignity, even after so much pain. In the days that followed, Daniel resumed his life with more ease. Lara's presence became increasingly significant. She never tried to replace anyone, but instead filled the void with care and presence. She was different from Amanda in every way, but she brought with her the same passion for family, the same dedication, but without Amanda's restlessness. Her children began to see her as a natural part of their daily lives, and this brought Daniel a comfort he never expected to find again. Amanda, in turn, began to take better care of herself. She sought psychological help, resumed old hobbies, and spent time with her children, trying to regain their respect, even though trust would take time. She no longer sought to return to the past. She now wanted to rebuild herself from the point where she had lost hers. Some nights were still filled with thoughts. But Daniel no longer felt remorse. He felt reflection. He knew that love is a risk, but he also knew that it's not about keeping someone by your side at any cost. It's about deserving their stay. And if someone chooses to leave, it's because, in some way, they were already gone a long time ago. In the last letter he wrote, not to Amanda, but to himself, Daniel wrote, "Love doesn't fail, but people do. And that's okay. Because true love isn't the kind that never hurts, it's the kind that teaches us to never settle for less than we deserve." After that, he folded the paper, put it in a box, and closed the drawer. The story that began with an irreversible break now ended with understanding and rebirth. And sometimes, the greatest turning point isn't winning back the one you lost. It's discovering that it was never you who was lost. Life resumed its flow with a different rhythm, as if a new beat had been established and now all decisions needed to adapt to the new melody imposed by time. There was no longer the weight of the unsaid, nor the poison of secrecy corroding the foundations of relationships. But the truth, even when it sets us free, leaves traces. And it was these traces that shaped the following days, not like exposed wounds, but like marks that, although no longer painful to the touch, remained there, silent, a reminder of what once was. Amanda continued her routine with more measured steps, not out of fear, but out of awareness. She no longer rushed to fill the voids with distractions or external voices. Now she faced the silence with firm eyes and sought to understand the choices that had led her to the lowest point in her history. Regret was no longer a state of suffering, but of learning. Every gesture, every phrase, said or unsaid, in the previous years now took on new meaning. And she finally began to see how much she had projected her frustration onto someone who had only tried to love her the way he knew how. During weekly visits with her children, she noticed Daniel's dedication to maintaining a healthy environment for them. There were never any derogatory words, never any attempts to distance himself. He was fair, firm, yet balanced. And this, more than any speech, showed Amanda that he wasn't seeking revenge. He was seeking peace. It was this maturity that presented her with an intimate dilemma. She couldn't, even with the deepest regret, try to rekindle what once was. Because what remained was no longer love between them, but rather a memory transformed into respect. And yet, within her, a constant, disturbing, and at the same time inevitable question arose: how could she love again after having lost the truest love she ever had? How could she rebuild herself knowing that, even if she had been forgiven, she would never be the woman he chose to love first? Lara, on the other hand, began to occupy not only the physical space of the house, but also the emotional space that had previously been Amanda's. She wasn't a substitute, and Daniel never treated her as such. She was an authentic presence, with her own unique traits, a calm, confident, and affectionate personality. She never asked too many questions about his past, but knew when to remain silent and when to be present. She was discreet in her gestures, but intense in her affections. Daniel found a calm complicity in her, without the ups and downs that marked his previous relationship. With her, he didn't have to constantly prove himself. He could be vulnerable, he could be flawed, and still feel loved. There were days when he still looked at the old letters he'd kept, but now it wasn't with pain. It was with gratitude. Every line written, every memory relived, now served as a marker of what it took for him to become who he was. Because pain shaped him, the grief of his marriage refined him, and rebuilding himself transformed him into someone stronger, more aware, and more selective about what he wanted by her side. There was, however, a moment when their paths crossed again unexpectedly. At a school event for Lucas, a theater performance to which all parents were invited. Amanda arrived first, sat in the front rows, and greeted teachers and classmates naturally. When Daniel entered with Lara and Isabella at his side, there was a brief moment of general discomfort, but he remained calm. Their eyes met, and a discreet nod was enough to settle everything. The play began, and during the final applause, Amanda watched the three of them laughing together, thrilled by Lucas's performance, and there, in that frozen moment, she understood, without anyone telling her, that she was no longer part of that core group. She was a side presence, a memory that had become a visitor. And though it hurt, there was also a mature acceptance. Because the worst form of unrequited love isn't what's denied, it's what was real but no longer is. Little by little, Amanda began to reconnect with others from her own story. She reconnected with her sister, from whom she had distanced herself after the separation, and rebuilt the bond with her mother, who had been one of the most critical pillars during her crisis. Her mother had spared no words in the past, but now watched her daughter's reconstruction with gentler eyes. One night, while visiting her, they sat on the porch, the radio playing old songs in the distance, and her mother told her that forgiving oneself is the hardest but most necessary step. That no one is the same person after a broken heart. And that, despite this, there is still beauty in the scars that become guides to avoid repeating the same mistakes. Amanda listened without interrupting, and for the first time, she cried in her mother's arms, not out of despair, but because she allowed herself to feel everything she had avoided for so long. Amid this rediscovery of herself, Amanda reconnected with an old university classmate, someone who had been part of her youth before Daniel came into her life. The reunion was casual, at an educational conference, where she had been invited to speak on the emotional challenges of teaching. The man, named Julian, approached her at the end of her presentation, praised her speech, and commented on how he remembered the strength with which she defended her ideals in the old days. They began talking right then and there, and something in that exchange awakened a forgotten feeling in her. It wasn't passion. It was presence. It was listening. It was lightness. Amanda felt fear, but she didn't back down. She allowed herself to experience this new, potential bond without the previous urgency. With caution, with attentive eyes, with a wiser heart. Daniel, for his part, was deepening his relationship with Lara, but now he faced his own moral dilemma. Even though the past was resolved, there was a lingering unease. Was he truly capable of loving again with the same dedication? Or had disappointment made him a half-hearted lover, afraid of getting hurt? Lara sensed this tenuous distance. It wasn't a lack of love. It was trauma. One night, she gently broached the subject. She said that everyone's time is different. That she wasn't there to occupy spaces that weren't hers, but to create new ones together. Daniel thanked her with a silent kiss on her forehead. She realized that loving again required courage, but that maybe, just maybe, he was ready to try. Meanwhile, the children grew up. Lucas began to ask deeper questions about his parents' separation. Isabella observed more than she spoke. Amanda never lied to them, but always chose words that avoided guilt and hurt. Daniel did the same. They both knew that, more than the adults' failings, what would shape the children would be how they learned to deal with life's wounds. And in this construction, even with their separate paths, there was a silent agreement between them, to protect their children above any pride. Over time, the exchanges between Daniel and Amanda became more relaxed. They weren't constant, but when they did occur, there was respect. They exchanged messages about school decisions, parent-teacher meetings, and their children's small achievements. They were like two ex-lovers who had finally found a way to coexist without resentment. But inside Amanda, there was still a wound she needed to close, the last letter Daniel had written. The one she never read, but knew existed. On impulse, she asked him. Not to regain anything, but to fully understand. Daniel hesitated, but days later, he left the letter in the school mailbox. Amanda read it at home, alone, with trembling hands. It was a short but powerful letter. In it, Daniel said that writing it was like closing the last door gently, without slamming it. He said he forgave her, not out of weakness, but out of strength. He wanted her to find herself again, to be happy, to rebuild her identity not based on guilt, but on learning. And he ended with a sentence that left her breathless: true love doesn't die, it changes shape. And sometimes, loving is just knowing how to let go. Amanda closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and realized that, for the first time in years, she no longer felt pain. She felt longing, perhaps. But a longing without ties. She knew she would never experience another love like that. But she also knew she deserved to experience something new, something clean, something her own. Time, ever patient, continued its course. The characters moved on. Some with scars, others with hope. But all changed. Because there is no way to experience love, destroy it, face it, and be reborn without being transformed. And as each one silently took their own path, life prepared to teach its final lesson. And it would come not as punishment or reward, but as a mirror. A clean, clear mirror, where each one would finally see the truth about who they had become. Late that Saturday afternoon, Amanda walked alone through the street market she used to go to with Daniel in the early years of their marriage. The stalls were the same, the smells and colors the same, but nothing felt the same. In every corner, there was a vivid memory, not of big fights or turbulent moments, but of simple, forgotten moments, the two of them picking ripe mangoes, laughing at something trivial, competing to find the reddest tomato. That hit her harder than any conversation or explicit memory. The cruelest longing was the one that arose from the little things. She passed a spice stall and remembered how much he loved cooking on Sundays, in an apron, with music playing in the background. She remembered how he made her laugh when he invented absurd recipes and served everything as if it were a feast. Now, all that existed there was the sound of the vendor offering spices, while she tried not to collapse. Later, at home, Amanda sat with a new notebook, which she had been using to write reflections and letters she would never send. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't writing to explain herself to someone, but to try to understand herself. She scribbled intensely, as if the pen could dig deep inside her until it found the exact spot where everything had begun to unravel. She wrote not to apologize, but to acknowledge how much she had neglected herself before neglecting the other. How much she had waited for Daniel to fill voids that were hers alone. How much you demanded more than you offered, without realizing it. And when she finished that text, she realized she no longer wanted to chase redemption. She wanted reconstruction. I wanted to grow from the rubble, not return to what was before. He put the notebook in a box along with some old photos, not to forget them, but to keep them as memories, not as prisons. In another part of the city, Daniel was enjoying a long weekend with Lara and their children in a rented house near the beach. It wasn't a pre-planned trip, but rather a spontaneous idea Lara had when she realized he needed some fresh air. It was a discreet, rustic place, without any major luxuries, but with a sweeping ocean view and a peace that filled the empty spaces of his soul. The children ran across the sand while Lara built a fire. Daniel sat on a wooden chair and gazed at the sea for long minutes. It was Lara who broke the silence when she sat next to him with a glass of wine in her hand. She said he felt miles away. Daniel smiled without taking his gaze off the horizon. He replied that it wasn't distance, it was digestion. He was digesting everything he'd experienced in the last few years. Lara didn't pressure him. She simply placed her hand on his, firmly and tenderly, as if to say, "I'm here, no matter where you are inside." That night, after the children were asleep, the two of them talked, lying on the mattress spread out on the porch, covered by a duvet and under a clear, starry sky. Daniel shared details he'd never shared before. He said that for a long time he believed that forgiving Amanda was enough to move on, but that only now did he understand there was a difference between forgiving and forgetting. That he had forgiven her, yes, but that forgetting would be the same as erasing parts of himself. That he needed to remember to value who he'd become. Lara listened silently. When he finished, she simply told him he didn't need to erase anything. That his past was part of what made him who he was today. And that she loved this man, entirely, with everything he carried. Daniel looked at her gratefully, kissed her forehead, and in that moment, without needing to say it, he understood that he could finally trust his heart to someone again. Days later, Amanda received an unexpected call from Lucas. He wanted to invite her for coffee. It was the first time her eldest son had taken such an initiative since their separation. They met at a discreet cafe, and seeing him there, so grown up, with a firm expression and eyes so reminiscent of Daniel's, she had to hold back tears. Lucas was direct. He said he knew it wasn't his place to judge his parents, that he had come to understand over time that adults make mistakes, too, and get lost, but that he missed having a more present mother, not just on dates, but in life. Amanda heard every word like a slap. He didn't speak with anger, he spoke with pain. She said she saw how well her father was doing, that she loved Lara, but that she had always wished her mother could find peace too. Amanda squeezed his hand and promised she wasn't trying to go back to the way things were, but to build something new. Lucas nodded. He said that was enough. And in that moment, for the first time, Amanda felt that maybe there really was hope of rebuilding something with her children, not like before, but in a different, more honest way. The following month, an event at Isabella's school brought the two parents together again. This time, everything felt more natural. Amanda arrived accompanied by Julian, her former classmate who had now become a constant presence in her life. He was discreet, respectful, and didn't try to take up too much space. He simply walked alongside her lightly, and that made a difference. Daniel, upon seeing them, simply smiled politely. Lara was at his side, and everything finally seemed harmonious. During the presentation, Isabella read an essay about people who inspire me, and between quotes from her brother and grandmother, she lovingly mentioned her parents, saying that even when they make mistakes, they keep trying to do the right thing. The room was moved, and Amanda had to hold back tears. After the event, Daniel approached her. They greeted each other with a mature, serene look, and he said he was happy to see that she seemed lighter. Amanda thanked him, saying that she was still learning, but that she could finally breathe. Later that evening, Daniel and Lara walked to a nearby park. He seemed pensive. He told her about his conversation with Amanda, about Lucas, and how everything was falling into place, but there was still something inside him that he needed to understand. He said he'd thought a lot about the concept of unconditional love and that, for the first time, he realized that perhaps true love wasn't the kind that never ends, but the kind that knows when to end and still wants the best for everything. Lara listened silently, squeezed his hand, and told him she loved him not for what he'd been through, but for how he'd come out of it. And that he shouldn't worry about being perfect with her, he just needed to be true. Daniel smiled and understood that there was room to start over, but without forgetting where he came from. Meanwhile, Amanda was organizing a small gathering with her students. It was a simple affair, but important to her. During the event, she read a poem she had written, a text about starting over. She spoke about forgiveness, bad choices, and the strength of finding oneself after losing oneself. When she finished, the room fell silent for a second before erupting in heartfelt applause. Julian was there, in the background, watching. After the gathering, he hugged her and told her she was finally allowing herself to blossom. Amanda replied that she didn't know what the future held, but that now, at least, she no longer felt trapped by the past. Time passed, the days gained color, the spaces filled with new stories. Daniel and Lara decided to buy a house together, not on impulse, but because they felt it was the natural next step. Amanda and Julian followed suit, but with growing complicity. Lucas and Isabella divided their time between their two homes without suffering, because they understood that it wasn't the structure of the house that defined a home, but the love and respect between the people who lived there. One random night, while Amanda was reading on the couch and Julian was making tea in the kitchen, she looked around and realized she no longer missed what she was missing. She felt gratitude. For having loved, for having made mistakes, for having suffered, and, above all, for having learned. The pain of loss had given way to the realization that some things only heal when you accept they won't go back to the way they were. And that's okay. Because sometimes, starting over isn't about going back. It's about moving on, different, but more whole. And it was in this gentle silence that precedes life's great understandings that everyone, each in their own way, prepared for the outcome of a story that began with a lost smile at a party and would end with a choice that would change everything. Because, in the end, it's not what we lose that defines who we are. It's what we choose to build from what's left. Months after that night when everything seemed to finally rest in balance, life surprised everyone with one of those twists and turns that time, silent and precise, likes to take. Daniel was organizing a small celebration in the backyard of their new home. It was Lara's birthday, and her children were enthusiastically preparing surprises. The house breathed lightness, the sound of voices mingled with the smell of food being prepared, and everything there seemed simple, genuine, and exactly as it should be. Lara, dressed unpretentiously, her hair casually tied back, observed Daniel's children as if they had been hers from the beginning. There was a rare naturalness about her, as if she had been born for this role but had never forced it. It was the kind of love that grows slowly, without fuss, but that establishes itself with deep roots. Daniel, watching that scene, felt he had finally built a home, not the same as before, not a copy of what he lost, but something new, strong, and without hidden cracks. Meanwhile, Amanda was following a different path. Not an immediate fresh start, but an internal journey that was proving increasingly difficult to ignore. Julian, though present, understanding, and generous, was beginning to realize an invisible wall existed between them. It wasn't a lack of affection, it was an absence of emotional freedom. Amanda, no matter how hard she tried, still struggled with the weight of the past, and this silent struggle was reflected in everything, in her glances, in the prolonged silences, in the way she avoided long-term plans. In a calm conversation, Julian said he admired her strength, but that love couldn't be something that struggles to exist. He wanted to be with her, but only if she also wanted to be whole. Amanda hugged him for long seconds, and in that gesture, he understood it was the end. Not out of lack of love, but out of dignity. She needed to find herself again before sharing her path with anyone. Julian left, leaving behind affection, but taking with him the clarity that some people are bridges, not destinations. Shortly thereafter, Amanda signed up for a 2-week silent retreat. Away from the city, away from social media, away from outside voices. It was there, amidst the silence and conscious solitude, that she was finally able to face her reflection without looking away. She wrote letters to her children she would never send, mentally revisited every choice that had distanced her from herself, and on a rainy night, she cried like she hadn't in years. It wasn't tears of guilt, it was mourning. For the woman she had been, for what she had destroyed, for what she had almost rebuilt, and most importantly, for what would never return. Upon returning, Amanda was different. Not light, not happy, but lucid. And this lucidity led her to her children's house on a late Sunday afternoon. Daniel greeted her with surprise, and she asked for a few minutes with the two teenagers. They sat on the porch, the three of them together, and Amanda spoke without rehearsal. She said she understood she would never have the same place again, that she didn't expect immediate acceptance, but that she was there not to be forgiven, but to assume her responsibilities. Lucas listened attentively, Isabella wept silently. And when Amanda finished, there were no hugs or declarations. There was just a simple gesture. Lucas held her hand, and Isabella rested her head on his shoulder. In that moment, without a word, she knew there was still room to rebuild their love, even if in a different way. As the weeks passed, Daniel and Lara decided to make their relationship official. Nothing grand, just an intimate celebration in the same backyard where their children were already playing, as if everything were part of a natural new chapter. Amanda was invited. She considered declining, but understood that being present was also a way of telling her children that she supported them, that she respected their new family, that she no longer harbored envy or resentment. She wore a discreet dress, her hair tied back, and a calm expression. During the ceremony, she watched her children smile, and in a moment of silence, she looked at Daniel from a distance. He looked back at her, and in that exchange of glances, there was no longer guilt, sadness, or resentment. Only respect and a shared history. After the ceremony, Amanda said goodbye early, left an envelope with a gift for Lara, and left before the night was over. Daniel opened the envelope later. Inside was a short note, where Amanda said, "Take care of her as you took care of me in my best days. She deserves it." And upon reading that, Daniel felt that, finally, the cycle was ending with dignity. Lara, for her part, never tried to erase Daniel's past. On the contrary, she always respected it. After the ceremony, she and Daniel traveled alone to a quiet spot in the mountains. There, between fireside chats and walks among the trees, they decided they would no longer carry the label of a second chance. Their life would be what they chose from then on, without comparing themselves to what had been, without seeking to repeat patterns. They wanted children, perhaps a new house in the future, but above all, they wanted to grow together, learn together, and maintain what they had built: peace, admiration, and companionship. Daniel wrote a new letter, not kept in a drawer, but delivered into Lara's hands. It said that if love is a garden, then she was the fertile soil where he could replant his hope. As for Amanda, she decided to accept a teaching position at a social project in another region. It wasn't an escape, it was a fresh start. She wanted to put her knowledge to work for something greater. She wanted to rediscover the woman who dreamed of impact, of transformative education. She sent regular messages to her children, arranged bi-weekly meetings, and gradually rebuilt her relationship with them on a sincere basis. She never again tried to seek another love. Not because she had given up, but because she understood that she needed to first love who she had become. One night, alone in her new apartment, she wrote in her diary, "Sometimes the punishment for betrayal isn't the punishment of others. It's the full awareness of what was lost." Lucas and Isabella grew up watching everything with attentive eyes. They learned more from their parents' silences than from their speeches. They learned that love requires effort, courage, and truth. And that true love, when betrayed, doesn't disappear, it transforms. Sometimes into longing, sometimes into wisdom. Years later, in a conversation with friends, Isabella was asked how she managed to be so emotionally mature. She replied that she saw her family fall apart, but she also saw that something new can emerge from the ruins. Betrayal destroys, but what you do after the destruction is what truly defines people. And that forgiveness isn't a way to forget. It's a way to not carry the burden forever. This story ends not with a return, but with an understanding. Not all loves are eternal, but some are so lasting that they shape who we are forever. Daniel found peace in an unexpected love. Amanda rediscovered her strength outside of marriage. Lara proved that love isn't about competition, it's about adding value. And her children were, in the end, the true heirs to a rare lesson, that the truth, even painful, can be liberating. Now, we want to know, what did you think of this story? Comment below with your opinion and subscribe to the channel to receive more exciting stories like this. This story teaches us that betrayal doesn't just destroy a relationship, it erodes trust, self-esteem, home, and one's very sense of belonging. And sometimes, what's lost isn't just the other person, it's oneself. So remember, on this channel, we don't support any kind of betrayal. Our purpose is to show, through fiction, the real scars that these choices leave. Until the next story, and may it find you in peace.